Okay. Before I give my speech, I'd like to thank the judges for being here on a Saturday and judging the debate, going through all of these rounds. I'd like to thank SRJC debate team for coming in and watching us. I'd like to thank the opposition's friends for coming in, or government team's friends for coming in and watching us. And I'd like to thank the government team for being here. I'm glad that we all were able to make the quarterfinals. I'd like to thank my partner for leading the case. And I'd lastly like to thank sharks, tigers, and bears for being named to the league. Now, with that, talking about that, all joking aside, now we've got to get back into the argument. Now, one, the solvency argument that the LO brought up, that my partner brought up, you need to cross-apply that to any advantages they can claim, because they cannot fiat Israel's actions. Because they cannot fiat Israel's actions, this plan does not have complete solvency. They can only say this might happen. They can only say this might do this. Also cross-apply that to any of the harms generated in the West Bank, that they are now circumstantial, that we do not know how Israel is going to go. However, considering Israel's determination to remain alive amid hostilities, we imagine they're going to continue to stay in the West Bank. I'd also like to talk about something that the Prime Minister brought up, which is that he was talking about preventing another war, and one of the things that he said was that feminicide was commonly happened, was the most popular thing during the war. And I'd like to establish a gender critique, that I don't think people should have their lives being parametricized by their gender. I don't believe that bringing up femicide and not talking about male death is fair. I believe that when you decide that someone dying in war, that their gender means that this is going to mean more, that their gender establishes that their life wasn't as worth someone else's gender, that's unfair. That shouldn't happen. I'd also like to talk about the United States is the biggest world power. So in their argument, when they're going to talk about that this is not going to be seen as something that is a big deal, that Israel is going to see this week, when the member of government talks about that Israel will not be seen this week, the United States is the biggest world power in terms of military and economic aid. When we decide to not send foreign aid, which includes military aid, we're ensuring that they do not have the biggest world power supporting them. That is incredibly important. That means that Israel is now going to have very few allies except for Egypt and Saudi Arabia. We don't believe that Egypt and Saudi Arabia nearly have the amount of power in foreign aid that the United States brings. The United States brings it to the table, is able to ensure that there is peace. Now, once they establish that this plan, once we enact this plan and it's not going to bring complete solvency, we now see a much more fair version of the debate, which is this is going to be a press opportunity for the United States to look to these countries that have an unfavorable view of Israel, and it's going to show them that we kind of support them maybe. Because all we're doing is declaring that we're not going to fund Israel if they do this. We're not going to go in there and make sure that we stop Israel from doing this. We're just saying if they do this, we're not going to give them money. And as my partner said, he was talking about how people don't want to see, how people in the Middle East want to see Israel wiped off the map. President Ahmadinejad of Iran said specifically this, that he wants to see Israel wiped off the map. So this six that we're talking about, specifically an enemy of the United States currently, we're in nuclear talks with, and we're trying to make sure that we have allies against this threat. When we have allies against this threat, I'll take your question in a moment. When we have allies against this threat of Iran, which according to the United Nations Nuclear Energy Commission, have the data to make a nuclear bomb, do we really want to lose an ally to force their hand? And just for the minor advantage of international press. Yes, I'll take your question.
So are you suggesting that the president of Iran represents, as your leader said, every country in the Middle East that wants Israel gone?
No, I'm not. But I'm talking about a specific example of someone who is capable of nuclear power, who is capable of working towards a nuclear bomb, and has specifically talked about wiping Israel off the map. So I'd also like to talk about something that my partner brought up, which is that that this comes down to, a political condition. That what we're saying is we don't like what you're doing and we're going to stop foreign aid. That my partner was talking about the fair weather friends argument. This is one of the disadvantages, is that it's going to harm the way our allies look at us. And more importantly, what it's going to do is it's make sure that every foreign aid that we have has a quid pro quo. It's going to make sure that the United States keeps with this argument that unless you're doing something for us, we're not going to give you foreign aid. We're not going to protect you unless you do exactly what we want because it works for us. We don't believe that's a sustainable policy. We don't believe that that should happen. We don't believe that that is going to work out for a lot of countries that need foreign aid that have enemies. Secondly, we believe that this is going to start wars more than it is going to prevent. A lot of the arguments made by two of the points in the advantages by the proposition, the government team, were that these will prevent wars. However, if we remove military support, if we remove economic aid for military support in Israel, then this is more likely that it's going to start wars because they already have so many enemies, because we're moving a major power from their military stronghold. So in that, I really want to go over again that the solvency, cross-applying that to the harm, cross-applying that to the harm generated by the West Bank, cross-applying that to cross-applying that to any advantage that they can gain, and also just in the plank of solvency. This plan does not show solvency for the harm. This shows a possible solvency. With that said, it looks more like Israel will continue to do what they're doing because they're a sovereign nation and because this is what they want to do. And as my partner said, it is unfortunate, as the proposition brought up, that the I'll take your question in a minute, that George W. Bush was giving unconditional funding to Israel. But because of that situation, this established that Israel was going to stay in the West Bank, that Israel was going to continue doing what it's doing, and that's going to be harder to do this. And we need a more complex plan than simply going to sustain all funding to Israel and to sustain all military support of Israel. Yes, your question.
Are you suggesting that doing nothing in the status quo suggests that Israel will in fact attack eventually? Are you suggesting that it's better to do nothing, whereas my partner pointed out in the past that historically this plan has actually stopped this from happening?
I'm saying that it's more important to do nothing right now to keep the status quo of what we've got, to keep international talks with Iran, to keep international talks with Israel, instead of trying to force their hand. Instead of trying to make a sovereign power bend down on their knees because we won't give them money, we won't give them military support. I think that's much better than making sure that there's quid pro quo argument by the United States to ensure that they do what we want when we tell them to, and we're not going to let allies have a say in this. That's unfair. There's also there was also a political process that was talked about, that the certain voting, and we can see that this could happen this way. However, this is not affirmative with the votes relating to Hamas, as the member and the TM brought up. That these votes relating to Hamas, these votes relating to certain groups are not necessarily going to happen, and therefore we dispute whether or not this is going to be a substantial enough change, that we're not seeing what's going to happen. And we believe that it's more likely that these groups will rise into power, seeing that the Israel's weak, than they will just by contesting alone that somehow we're going to immediately, that somehow our lack of involvement will stop a sovereign country from doing what they want to do and what they have done. For example, the United States went into Iraq and invaded, even though the international community went against it. Clearly, our own policies dictate that we're going to look after ourselves first. If this is the case, how can we expect any less from a sovereign nation? This sovereign nation is receiving foreign aid from us, and we shouldn't condition it. We could talk to them, we could do something else. We shouldn't condition the foreign aid that they get, especially since in this incredibly hostile environment with multiple complexities, as the PM and the MG have brought up. This is a very complex issue dealing with a large amount of political government. This is dealing with dealing with a huge amount of issues, dealing with resources, dealing with policies, dealing with which groups are in control, and dealing with which religions say that they're more right, and dealing with a large amount of nuclear technology. And for that, I urge you to vote for the solvency, for the critique, for everything that I mentioned here. I urge you to vote for the negative. Thank you.
Leader Box, you have 4 minutes. Because we're now judges, and you guys call points of order, they'll all be taken.